Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in today and joining us for this session on water activity. My name is Monica Trevere. I'm the Director of Sales at Sustainable Harvest, and we're a specialty coffee importer based in Portland, Oregon. I'm joined by my colleague, Yimara Martinez.
Hello everyone.
And today we're going to talk to you about water activity and, most importantly, its relation to green coffee quality. And specifically, we'll address its effects on cup profile and also on shelf life of coffee, so how that coffee ages over time. The observations on water activity that we'll be discussing today are based on a report that will be available after the talk for you all to download. But the report analyzed nearly 1,800 samples from 28 different countries over the course of 4 years. The 1,800 samples that were evaluated represent all processing methods: natural, honeys, washed, wet hold, and even some other unidentified or experimental processes. So it's really comprehensive and gives us a good guide to understand the effects that water activity has based on the processing method, but also on the overall characteristics of the green coffee. Given that the analysis of the samples was so comprehensive, it gives us a really good base from which we can make some assumptions about the effect that water activity has on green coffee quality. Before we dig into the findings of this report, I'll introduce you to my colleague, Yimara Martinez, so that she can introduce us to the basics and give us a definition first on what even is water activity.
Thank you, Monica, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity to be with all of you today. I'm from Colombia. I'm daughter of smallholder producers, and I'm a Q grader. And recently, I get my certification as a Q processing expert level, and I'm a Q processing instructor in the processing category. All these years, I've been studying the water activity, and I'm very pleased to be with all of you today.
So, Yimara, we know we're going to talk about green coffee today, but water activity is a measurement used across all industries that relate to food. So can you help us understand objectively what does water activity measure and what is it?
Yeah, of course. We're going to start talking about what is water activity, and I think it's important to recognize there are a lot of information available for the people and very good scientific information. And in the history, we can review the water activity are being known and recognized in the industry of seeds for a long time. But in coffee, it really is something very new, and we have to continue studying for understand better what happened inside the bean. Now we're gonna go to what is kind of the definitions of water activity. And water activity is a thermodynamic parameter that help us to understand the shelf life of the coffee. Then basically it's like the chemical potential that the water in the bean has to have reactions. These reactions can be positive, these reactions can be negative, and this is why we need to understand those better for we can take better approach of those. And what we really wanted everybody understand is that this is the potential that the bean have to interact in general.
The other thing we talk a lot about is moisture content, and I would say that's probably something that's more widely understood, maybe because it's simpler to explain. But can you tell us first what moisture is and also what the difference is between moisture and water activity?
Yeah. Moisture content is the amount of water that we have in a material. Basically, is measured in percentage and is in base of a total of weight in a product. And for the specialty coffee, we have the moisture content is in a range to 10 to 12%. 10% means the coffee is dry and basically kind of going to the point to getting too dry. And when we are talking about 12%, that means that the coffee have a lot of moisture, and this is like the extreme. In general, we talk about that the better point of moisture content will be 11%. Going back and reviewing a little bit more about the water, let's imagine that we have a cherry, a coffee fruit, or even the green coffee when we receive it in our labs. Each bean have a ton of cells and a ton of molecules of water. They are interacting inside the bean. And this water that is inside of each bean is not like the one specific water. We have 4 types of water in each bean. The 4 types of water that we have in the beans or they are being analyzed or studied is the constitutional water in the first category. That basically is the water that is in the material or like the inside, very deep inside in each cells, and there is a water that is not easily removed. It's a water that basically is super important for the functional of the cells. The second one is the absorbed water. This water basically is absorbed by monolayers or polylayers into the cells. This water can be partially removed when we are drying coffee. The third one is the solvent water. The solvent water is basically under the osmotic tension of the beans. This water is fundamental for we can develop microbes, or that we can have, in this case, development of fungi. That is what we don't want in coffee. Then this water should be removed when we are drying the coffee. This is a very important water to remove. Let's remember that the bean have a ton of different layers inside, and when we are drying coffee, the water go to the innermost of the bean going outside. Then this is why this one is kind of key for us when we are talking about water activity. And we have the last one, the fourth one, is the capillary water. And this is the water that is basically kind of accumulate or absorb in the external part of the bean. And this one is the first one that we remove when we start drying coffee. The reason why we talk about the types of water is because coffee, even a green bean, when after we dry it and we receive it, is a living thing. And because it's alive, require water for can have the normal reactions. And then when we roast it, we can have the Maillard caramelization and all the reactions that we need for we can express this in the flavor. But without this water, the bean basically don't gonna have any of the reactions, or the quality gonna be very poor. Then if we also don't have enough water, we can kill the embryo and the bean can die. If we check in general, like talking about seeds, water is super important for we can plant again a new tree. If the embryo is dead, we don't gonna have the chance to plant a new coffee tree. Then let's don't go too deep to this part and let's focus in the green coffee. I think in general is very important that we just keep in mind that the water is what makes possible everything, that we can have a coffee that can last for a long time and can have and develop a lot of the characteristics and flavor, but can also be the influence that the coffee can deteriorate. The very important thing to keep in mind is all this water is key for the stability of the bean. All these types of waters can be represented by water activity or moisture content. And the relation between these both is the both need to be removed in some point or to determine point in the drying stage, for we can have a bean that is stable. In our findings, we discovered that the correlation that exists in water activity and moisture content is a moderate positive correlation. That means there is not a perfect correlation. When we have a perfect correlation, is that both of the variables that we are measuring basically can move in the same direction. That can be up or can be down, but in green coffee, that is kind of the difference that we can find when we are measuring. We can have sometimes the moisture content is a little bit up or higher, and the water activity is not. And why this can happen is because the drying stage is what makes the huge difference. And this is going back to the water and how the water moves inside the bean. All these molecules can migrate from the inside to the bean to the outermost in different ways. That can be easily, that can be slowly, that can have interactions or interruptions when we are drying. Then in this point is what water activity or moisture can be more affected. We can have moisture contents that at some points are great, but if we review the water activity, that's going to be the opposite. Maybe the water activity is not so great. In the industry, like we all know, we have the moisture content, basically the range that we use is 10 to 12%. But now focusing in water activity, the ideal range, or that we can call a range, is like a 0.4 to 0.6. This is what we have found in all our data that we are reviewing all these years. This is the point where the beans are more stable. If we focus in where can be the middle point where the bean is so much stable is 0.5, that easily correlate to a moisture content of 11%. To summarize this first part of water activity, we like to mention the point where we have found that the beans are more stable, and we have beans they are being for long time in inventory and they still keeping incredible, and the beans looks amazing. We don't see any evidence of like the bean are starting deteriorating. Is in coffees that have moisture content and 11%, and talking about water activity 0.5. To finish this chapter, coffees that are in between 0.4 to 0.6 are coffees that have the greatest shelf life. That being said, is like the coffees that we don't see any reflections like in the coffee deteriorating easily, visual and deterioration, and no like the sensory deterioration when we cup the coffees. Now I invite you, all of you, to listen in. Monica gonna continue with storage and shelf life.
As Yimara laid out for us, the ideal range that we found in our analysis for water activity was between 0.4 and 0.6. Within this range, we found that coffees were most stable and held up the best in cupping analysis and grading analysis over time. What's significant about this is it lets us know that water activity is key to the longevity and shelf life of coffee. Another really important characteristic that affects water activity and thus the shelf life are storage and transport conditions for green coffee. Coffee is hygroscopic, which means that green coffee absorbs the moisture in the environment around it. And similarly, if the environment is lacking moisture, coffee will give the moisture that it has. It will leave the bean. These extreme conditions, if they exist, of high or low moisture or high or low temperature, can affect the water activity and the moisture of coffee when it's in transport and when it's in storage in the warehouse. Because coffee can absorb moisture from its environment, it's really important that coffee is stored in stable conditions, and the two most important factors to control are temperature and relative humidity. When we talk about ideals for maintaining the stability of coffee, the temperature should be 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and the relative humidity should be no greater than 75%. Coffee with a water activity reading above 0.6 means that that coffee is more likely to absorb moisture from the environment, resulting in the degradation of the bean. Bean degradation can manifest in several ways. One such way is the rapid physical deterioration, like bean discoloration or beans turning white, which is something you'll be able to see when you look at the green coffee. You don't need to look at it under a UV light or anything. A second way bean degradation can manifest is as the development of off flavors in the cup or even defects such as phenol. Phenol resulting from these changes in environment that also cause the internal environment of the bean to change. Another example would be a loss of sensory qualities, such as muted flavors and aromas. On the other end of the spectrum, when we fall below the ideal range of 0.4 to 0.6, coffees with a water activity reading below 0.4 will present themselves in the cup with muted flavors and aromas. And this is because there's not enough water available in the bean to make the necessary chemical reactions happen in the roasting process. So we've laid out a lot of pretty technical information. Luckily, you'll have the report to reference back to if there's anything that needs clarification. But what we want to do now is talk about this in context and why all of this matters, what effects it can have on the quality of your coffee as a roaster or as a consumer, but also what implications does this have for producers. We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about water activity, we've talked about moisture, we've talked about stability, and we've briefly touched on the loss of characteristics that can happen in the cup if water activity is out of the ideal range. But I wonder, what is the correlation, if any, between water activity and cup score?
The correlation is that the water is the one who's going to help the bean to be preserved, or they preserve all these characteristics and qualities, but is not directly correlated to how the flavor is developed. I cannot say that the water activity is the one who's going to make a coffee cup 87 or 100 points, because that is not true. The flavor starts since the bean is formatting in the plant, and is the accumulation of multiple factors that can be microclimate, that can be varieties, that can be the processing techniques, and even the drying is what we are focusing here. Then, that is no direct correlation. What's going to help is that this quality that we have already can be better preserved.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you can have a coffee that scores 80 points and has the ideal moisture content in the ideal water activity, but you can also have a coffee that scores 87 points with high moisture and high water activity. It's just that the lower scoring coffee with the good qualities will age better over time. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. Basically, that is a great point, Monica, because basically what happened here is the coffees that has a great water activity and moisture content. This is what we mean with stable. These coffees, we can save it or keep it in our inventory a little bit longer, and maybe start rotating our inventory and using the coffees they are in this range, they are not stable. And in those cases, that's going to be the best approach that we can have for the water activity that we have in these coffees.
Okay, awesome. That makes sense. Okay, so water activity isn't a predictor of cup score necessarily, but it does inform shelf life and stability. So the example I gave of the high scoring coffee with high moisture or high water activity, what would you recommend doing if a coffee like that falls into your lap?
Basically, we'll say or advise to the producer, one is they can dry the coffee a little bit more for make that this great coffee with this great score can be stable. And that is in the case if the producer just send the pre-shipment sample, but if we have already here the coffee, if the customer or roaster already received this coffee, I will advise they just use it faster. The coffee gonna still having great flavors at the moment, but basically more moisture and more water activity gonna accelerate all the reactions and make the degradation faster. And that can be very visible when we look the beans, and that can be also very noticeable when we cup the coffee, because that's gonna mark aging super fast, and can be very sad because the producer did a great job and the coffee was great, but just was not stable in their shelf life.
Okay. You just brought up a really good point, and I think it segues into the next question I had for you, which is about what are producers to do with this information, and what are the implications on these findings for them?
I think it's very kind of complicated question in the sense that the producer already have too much pressure on it. And if we say just measure water activity and like they send me a coffee in this specific range, that is impossible. Like a lot of the producers even don't have equipment for measure moisture content. No, they don't want to have equipment for measure water activity. I think what we can really focus our efforts and try to educate and support our producer is like asking them to do a good practices processing and focus on drying the coffee how better they can for they can deliver coffees that are stable without having the equipment.
Yeah. Are there any implications for food safety?
Yes, they are. I think this is why we come back to the conversation of drying, because from the drying is where it start everything with water. Drying is what gonna help us to this water migrate and migrate well and the coffee be stable. If the coffee is not drying well, that means the water is not migrated, the enough water that we need to migrate, like this one who can develop fungi, that is the one who gonna affect and basically make the we can be at risk in food safety. Then I think the more easy way is just give it good advices to the producer, make sure that they are rotating the coffee. Don't matter, like they can be different types of drying methods that they are using for their coffees, but like they can make sure that the water is moving, like they are losing water, that they are drying, the coffee have enough ventilation, the coffee is not stuck there without losing moisture, because then is when in this case ochratoxin can happen. Then what coffees can be more at risk to produce ochratoxin or kind of have these kind of alerts of food safety? Definitely honeys and naturals are more prone for develop, because they have multiple layers and it's more difficult to lose moisture. Then this is also important for the producers to know, and like if they are gonna change the processing method that they are being using forever, at least know their climatic conditions that they have, and if they have everything for do a good natural. If no, that can be kind of risky to produce coffees if you are not sure that the coffee gonna be able to lose moisture.
So to wrap things up, how does all this information impact buyers, and what do you think they should be aware of?
I think it's very important the buyers or the roaster know that the water activity by itself doesn't affect the quality of the coffee, but is a great predictor, or it is a predictor of the shelf life. And also the water activity need to have a combination of the environment. Like let's say that if the buyer is warehousing their coffee, it's not like they are gonna buy this coffee and have a great water activity and moisture content. If my conditions from my warehousing are not great, basically I'm gonna have a negative impact and the water activity can change, and that gonna affect the quality and the stability of the bean, and basically that result in a coffee that don't gonna have a great shelf life.
Thanks, Yimara. Those are awesome insights. With that, I think our work here is done. So thanks again to everyone for joining us. As I mentioned in the beginning, the comprehensive report will be available for download, and this is an ongoing process for us. So we'd love to hear your feedback, comments, questions, and we will be available in the Q&A. Talk to you soon.